The alien marketplace was full of noise and colors. Vendors shouted about fresh fruits, rare spices, and shining metal trinkets. Children ran between the stalls, laughing and chasing each other. Air was filled with smells of roasted meat and sweet bread. But in one corner, there was a strange emptiness. No stall, no customer. No seller dared to go near. She sat there on the cold stone ground, her back against a cracked wall. Her clothes were torn and covered in stains. Her hair was a tangled mess that hung over her face, and her smell was so strong that even the wind seemed to carry it away from the market. People passing by covered their noses and moved quickly. Some whispered insults. Others spat on the ground. No one dared to stop. Her eyes were dull and tired. Staring at the ground as if there was nothing worth seeing, her hands trembled. Not from cold, but from hunger. She had not eaten in days. The basket beside her was empty. It had once been for collecting coins or bread from kind strangers, but now it was only a reminder that kindness was rare. Then, through the busy street, a human man walked. He was tall, wearing a simple brown coat and carrying a bag over his shoulder. His steps were calm but confident. Unlike the others, he did not change his path when he saw her. The crowd noticed him murmuring in confusion. They had seen humans before, but never one so fearless. As he came closer, the smell hit him. It was strong, sour, and heavy. Most people would have stepped back, but he stopped only a few feet away. The alien girl looked up, surprised to see someone standing so close. Her voice was dry, weak, almost a whisper. "What do you want?" she asked. No one had spoken to her in days. Around them, vendors called out warnings. "Human, stay away from her," shouted an old alien selling herbs. "She's cursed," said another. "You'll regret touching her." The man ignored them, his eyes fixed on the girl. He crouched down to her level. "Are you hungry?" he asked. She blinked, unsure how to answer. Her lips moved, but no words came. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small bottle of water. The cap clicked open, and he held it out. She stared at it as if it was something dangerous. Slowly, she reached for it, her dirty fingers brushing his hand. The water was cold against her skin. She took one sip, then another. Her throat worked hard, swallowing when the bottle was empty. She held it close, like it was a treasure. The human man removed his coat and draped it over her shoulders. Gasps came from the crowd. No one had touched her in months. The girl froze, feeling the strange warmth of fabric that did not smell of filth for a moment. She forgot about the stares around her. She forgot about the insults. She only felt the coat's weight and the man's steady presence. The market had gone quiet. Even the vendors had stopped shouting. Everyone was watching. The human stood up, offering his hand to her. Her heart pounded. Every instinct told her not to trust anyone. Every memory warned her of betrayal. But his eyes were steady, calm, and kind. Something inside her wanted to believe. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. The crowd gasped again. It was as if a forbidden line had been crossed. The human helped her stand. Her legs were weak. Shaking under her weight, he held her steady, and without another word, began to lead her away as they walked. Whispers followed them. Some voices mocked, some cursed, some laughed, but a few, very few, were silent, watching with something like respect. The girl kept her head down. Her grip on his hand was trembling but firm. She didn't know where he was taking her. She didn't know why he was helping. All she knew was that, for the first time in a long time, someone was walking toward her instead of away. The market's noise faded behind them, the smell of food, and dust was replaced by the cold air of the empty street ahead. She wanted to ask him why. She wanted to tell him to leave her. But her voice would not come. Somewhere deep inside, she feared that if she spoke, this strange, fragile moment would vanish like smoke in the wind. They disappeared around the corner. The marketplace slowly returned to life, but in the quiet corner where she had sat for months, only the empty space remained. And for the first time, it did not smell of despair. The human's hand was warm, steady, and real. It had been so long since anyone had touched her without shoving, hitting, or dragging her away. Her first reaction was fear. Fear that this kindness was a trick. Fear that his smile was only a mask hiding cruelty. But his grip was gentle, not forcing, only supporting. They walked slowly through the narrow streets that connected the market to the lower district. She stumbled once, and he caught her by the arm. Her heart jumped at the contact. The old memories rushed back, rough hands, cruel voices, the cold stones of punishment cells. She pulled away, almost losing her balance. He stopped, not offended, and waited for her to calm. "You don't have to be afraid," he said softly. His voice was deep but calm, carrying no command, no order. She didn't reply. Her throat felt dry again. The smell from her clothes clung to them both now. She was used to it, but she wondered how he could bear it. Still, he didn't let go. From the corner of her eye, she saw the stairs. Aliens stopping their work to watch the strange sight, a human walking side by side with the girl no one dared touch. Their whispers followed, "That man must be mad." Someone said, "Or maybe he can't smell." Another laughed. She lowered her head, feeling the familiar sting of shame. They turned into a shaded street where the sunlight could not reach. The walls here were damp, painted with layers of old graffiti. Puddles reflected broken images of the two as they walked. Her bare feet splashed in the cold water. She shivered. But not from the chill. She was still wondering why he was doing this. Finally, she gathered the courage to ask, "Why? Are you helping me?" The words were slow, unsure, like they had forgotten how to form in her mouth. He didn't answer immediately. He looked at her for a moment, as if searching for the right reply. "Because you need it," he said simply. No long speech, no deep explanation, just those 3 words. They reached a small open square where a few stalls sold leftover goods. An old alien woman stood behind one. When she saw the girl, her face twisted. "Not here." The woman barked, waving her away. The human stepped forward, placing a coin on the counter. "I'll take 2 loaves of bread," he said. The woman hesitated, but greed won over disgust. She handed him the bread without meeting the girl's eyes. He tore 1 loaf in half and handed it to the girl. Her fingers hovered, unsure if she should take it. Then hunger won. She bit into the bread, and her eyes widened at the taste. It was fresh, soft, and warm, the kind of food she had once dreamed about. She ate quickly, almost afraid someone would snatch it away. A sudden movement caught her attention. 3 young alien men stepped out from a side alley. They were laughing, their eyes fixed on her. "Well, well," one of them said. The rotten one found herself a pet human. Another added, "Careful human. She spread her filth to you." Her heart sank. She knew these faces. They had thrown stones at her before, chased her through the streets for fun. The human stepped between them and her. His back was straight. His voice calm. "Move," he said. The tallest of the 3 laughed and stepped closer. "And if we don't?" The human didn't raise his voice, but his hand shifted slightly inside his coat. A glint of something metal showed for just a second. The bullies exchanged glances, their laughter fading. One spat on the ground, muttered something, and they backed away, disappearing into the shadows. The girl stared at him in disbelief. No one had ever stood up for her, not once, not ever. She didn't know whether to thank him or warn him. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "They'll come back." He glanced over his shoulder and shrugged. "Then I'll still be here," he said, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. They continued walking. The streets grew quieter. the buildings older. She could hear the faint sound of running water somewhere ahead. A strange unease filled her. She wasn't used to going anywhere safe. Only away from danger, never toward comfort. But he walked with the same steady pace. Not rushing, not hesitating. Finally, they reached a small building with faded walls and a heavy door. He unlocked it, holding it open for her. The air inside was warm and faintly scented with something clean soap. It was a smell she had almost forgotten existed. Her body tensed, unsure if she should step inside. "This is my home," he said. "You can rest here." She stayed at the doorway, the bread still in her hands. Her mind screamed that this was too strange, too good, but her feet betrayed her. Carrying her across the threshold, the door closed softly behind her. The noise of the outside world faded. For the first time in years, she was somewhere no one could throw her out. Somewhere her smell didn't push someone away. She didn't know what would happen next. But she knew one thing. The human's hand had not felt like every other hand she had known. It hadn't pushed her down. It had pulled her up. The first thing she noticed inside his home was the quiet, no voices mocking her. No footsteps running away from her. The walls were worn but clean, and the floor felt solid under her feet. A small table stood near the window, with 2 chairs. On the other side of the room was a closed door. And from behind it came the sound of running water. Her chest tightened. Water meant washing, and washing meant exposing herself. She didn't know if she was ready. The human set his bag on the table and glanced at her. "You can sit," he said, his tone casual, but she didn't move. Her hands clutched the last piece of bread like it was her only anchor. He didn't press her, just went to the cupboard and took out another bottle of water. This time, she took it without hesitation. The cool liquid slid down her throat. Easing the dryness, outside the window, voices passed by. Someone said, "That's where the human lives." Another voice answered, "He's keeping her inside." Followed by a laugh, the words sank into her ears. Each one heavy. They knew she was here, and the idea that they might follow made her uneasy. After a while, the human stepped toward the door and opened it. "Come on," he said. "You need to clean up." Her feet stayed rooted to the floor. She shook her head, the fear pressing against her ribs. "I can't," she whispered. He didn't frown, didn't get angry. Instead, he nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "Then we'll take a walk first." She didn't understand. A walk? Outside, again. But his tone was calm, and a small part of her trusted him enough to follow. So she stepped out into the street, staying close to him. The sun had shifted, casting long shadows along the narrow path. The air was cooler now, but the smell clung to her. She could feel it moving ahead of her like an invisible warning sign. As they walked, people noticed them instantly. Heads turned, conversations stopped, mothers pulled their children closer. Merchants leaned over their counters to watch. It was as if the sight of a human walking beside her was more shocking than anything else in their day. One alien woman called out, "Hey, human, you don't know what you're touching." Another laughed loudly. Maybe he likes the smell. Her cheeks burned, every word felt like a lash, but he didn't even look at them. His gaze stayed forward, his pace steady. They passed a group of workers repairing a wall. One of them spat on the ground as they walked by. The girl flinched. But the human's hand rested lightly against her back, guiding her forward. It wasn't a push. It wasn't force. It was just enough to remind her she wasn't alone. When they reached the open square near the fountain, the stairs became sharper. The fountain water sparkled under the sun. Children were splashing and laughing, but the moment they saw her, the laughter faded. The space around the fountain seemed to shrink. She remembered standing here years ago when she was clean, when no one avoided her. It felt like another lifetime. The human walked to the fountain and sat on the edge. He patted the spot beside him, she hesitated, glancing at the children and their parents. They were already whispering, some turning away in disgust, but something in his calm expression made her step closer and sit. The stone was warm beneath her. The sound of the water was soft, almost soothing. He took out a small cloth from his pocket, dipped it into the fountain, and began wiping the dirt from her hands. She froze, not used to anyone caring about such things. Her first instinct was to pull away, but his touch was gentle, careful. The cool water on her skin felt strange, not painful, not cold enough to punish, just clean. A few patches of skin showed through the grime. She barely recognized the pale color underneath. The people around them kept staring. Some shook their heads, some muttered insults. But he didn't stop. When he was done, he gave her the cloth to hold. She stared at it for a moment before folding it neatly in her lap. It was the first clean thing she had touched in months. After a while, he stood and offered his hand again. This time, she took it without hesitation. They walked further down. The street passed more stalls. The smell of food made her stomach ache with hunger. He bought a small bag of dried fruit from a vendor, one of the few who didn't sneer at them. They shared it as they walked, the sweetness lingering in her mouth. But even with the small kindness, she could feel the weight of the stairs behind them. It was like walking under a sky full of watchful eyes, some curious, some cruel, all judging. She wondered how long he could bear it. She wondered when he would decide she was too much trouble. Yet every step he took was steady, without hesitation. It was almost as if he didn't notice the rest of the world. As they reached the edge of the district, the streets grew quieter. The buildings here were older, the walls covered in green moss. A stray animal darted across their path, disappearing into the shadows. The girl realized her breathing had slowed. The tension in her shoulders had eased just a little. She wasn't safe, not yet, but for the first time in years she felt less alone. The human stopped in front of a narrow alley. "We're close," he said, his voice still calm. She didn't know what he meant, but she followed anyway. The alley smelled faintly of rain, and somewhere ahead, she could hear the sound of flowing water again. Her steps slowed. She didn't know if she was ready for what was coming, but she knew this walk, with all its stares, whispers, and judgment, had already changed something inside her. The alley opened into a small courtyard hidden between tall buildings. Here, the noise of the market was only a distant hum. In the center stood a water pump connected to a rusted pipe that disappeared into the wall. A trickle of water dripped from the spout. Pooling into a shallow basin below, the girl stopped, her bare feet rooted to the ground, every muscle in her body tightened. The human stepped forward and tested the pump handle. It creaked loudly, then released a stream of water that splashed into the basin. Clear, clean, and steady. The sound filled the courtyard for him. It was nothing special, just water. For her, it was a memory she wanted to forget. She took a step back, her breathing quickened. Her mind flashed with images of cold water being dumped over her head as punishment. The shouts, the laughter, the cruel hands forcing her down. Her body shook without her permission. Her eyes darted to the exit, calculating if she could run. The human noticed. He didn't touch her, didn't force her closer. Instead, he crouched near the pump and dipped his hand under the stream. The water ran over his fingers. Catching the sunlight, he looked at her and smiled gently. "It's warm," he said. "See?" She didn't move. Her arms were wrapped tightly around herself. The smell from her clothes mixed with the fresh scent of water. It was a strange combination. Filth and purity sharing the same air. He stood and took a step back from the pump. "This isn't to hurt you," he said. "It's to help." The words echoed in her head. They were simple, but they sounded different from the commands she had heard before. Her gaze shifted to the stream. It was so clear she could see tiny bubbles swirling at the edges. Her dry, cracked hands ached at the thought of the water touching them. Finally, She took a small step forward. The stone under her foot was cold. Her chest tightened with every inch closer. When she was only a few steps away, she froze again. Her eyes flicked up to his, searching for any sign of a trick, but his expression stayed the same. Patient, steady, unchanging. He crouched again, cupped his hands under the stream, and held the water out to her. She stared at it as if it were molten metal. Her lips trembled, slowly. She extended her fingers toward his cupped hands. The first drop landed. On her skin, it was warm. Her breath caught, her eyes widening in shock. It wasn't freezing. It wasn't sharp. It didn't burn. It simply slid down her hand. Leaving a clean path through the dirt, another drop followed, then another. She gasped quietly. The sound almost lost under the water's trickle. The fear didn't vanish instantly, but it shifted. She wanted more. He poured the rest of the water. Over her fingers, mud-brown streams ran down into the basin. The sight made her chest feel light. She touched her own skin and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Warmth that came from care. Not harm. Without speaking, he pumped more water. Filling the basin until it was halfway full, he stepped aside, letting her decide. She stared at the shallow pool. Her reflection wavered on the surface, a shadowy face under a curtain of hair. She reached down and let both hands sink into the water. It was like touching a memory she thought was gone. The dirt dissolved around her fingers. Revealing pale skin beneath, she splashed some on her arms. Then her face, the grime loosened, dripping back into the basin. She blinked as cool drops slid down her cheeks. Somewhere deep inside, a wall began to crack. Her shoulders dropped slightly, the tension easing. The human handed her a small cloth from his bag. It was clean, soft, and smelled faintly of soap. She hesitated before taking it. When she pressed it against her skin, it absorbed the dirt and sweat instantly. She rubbed it over her arms, her neck, her face. With each motion, the heaviness she had carried seemed to lift. A small smile tugged at the corner of her lips, not wide. Not confident, but real, he noticed, but didn't comment. Instead, he began rinsing the cloth in the basin, keeping the water fresh. They worked together in silence, the sound of water and fabric filling the air. When her hair was damp and her skin a few shades lighter, she stepped back from the basin. The sunlight caught the clean patches of her face. She touched her cheek, as if making sure it was still there. Her smell was still strong, but less sharp now. For the first time in a long time, she felt different. The human didn't rush her. He simply said, "There's more where that came from." She nodded slowly. Not ready for a full bath yet, but no longer terrified. Something had changed with that first drop of water. It had washed away more than just dirt. It had taken a piece of her fear with it. As they left the courtyard, the sound of the water still echoed in her ears. It no longer sounded like a threat. It sounded like a promise, and for the first time, she wanted to hear it again. Back at the human's home. The air felt warmer. The faint scent of soap drifted from the closed door he had pointed to earlier. It was small inside, but everything had its place. No clutter, no filth, no dust. She stood near the doorway, unsure if she was allowed to move, her bare feet pressed against the clean floor. It felt strange, like stepping on something too good for her. The human set a folded pile of clothes on the table. A plain shirt, soft trousers, and a thick towel. All clean. All smelling faintly of lavender. She stared at them as if they were treasures stolen from another world. "There for you," he said, his tone casual. Her lips parted in disbelief. But no sound came. He opened the bathroom door, and the warm air rolled out. Steam curled from the shower, carrying the scent of fresh water and soap. Her chest tightened again, the fear from before creeping back. But now there was also a strange pull inside her. She remembered the feeling of that first drop in the courtyard, how it had slid down her skin without hurting. He didn't try to push her inside. Instead, he stepped in first, adjusted the stream, and tested it with his hand. "It's warm," he said again. "You'll be safe." The word safe echoed in her mind like something she had never truly understood. She stood there for a long moment. Then, as if her legs decided before her mind, she stepped forward. The water sound filled the small room. It wasn't harsh, it wasn't loud. It was constant, steady, like a soft heartbeat. Her fingers brushed against the steam and came back damp. She looked at him, her eyes questioning. He nodded. "Go." Ahead, she reached out slowly, letting the warm stream touch her fingertips. It was gentler than she expected. Encouraged, she moved her whole hand under it. The grime began to soften instantly. A thin stream of brown water ran toward the drain. She gasped quietly. The dirt she thought had become part of her was melting away. The human stepped back to give her space. He handed her the towel and soap. Her fingers curled around the bar, feeling its smooth surface. She had not held something so clean in years. At first, she rubbed the soap on her arms hesitantly, but as the water rinsed it away, leaving skin she barely recognized, her movements grew bolder. Her hair was the hardest part. The strands were matted, heavy with old dirt. She worked the soap through slowly. Foam formed, turning dark as it trapped the filth. When the warm water rinsed it out, she felt her head grow lighter. The weight she had carried, not just dirt, but the shame of it, began to lift. Minutes passed, though she lost count. Her skin was now visible, pale in some places, slightly scarred in others. She touched her own arm, almost expecting to feel the roughness still there, but it was smooth. She turned toward the mirror above the sink for a moment. She didn't recognize the face looking back. Her eyes were the same, tired but alive, yet the grime that had hidden her features was gone. Her cheekbones showed. Her lips had color. The hair framing her face was darker and shinier than she remembered. It wasn't beauty-like in the stories. It was something more rare, the proof she had survived. She stepped out of the shower, wrapping herself in the towel. The human was waiting outside, leaning against the wall. When he looked at her, there was no shock, no pity, only quiet approval. "You look different," he said. She didn't know how to answer, so she simply lowered her eyes, not from shame, but from an unfamiliar shyness. He handed her the clean clothes. The fabric was soft against her skin as she put them on. They were slightly loose, but they smelled like comfort. When she stepped back into the main room, she felt the floor in a new way, warm, solid, hers to stand on. The human glanced up and smiled faintly. The change wasn't only on her skin. Her posture was straighter, her shoulders less tense, the smell that had once been her invisible. Shield was fading. In its place was something softer, the scent of soap, water, and hope. She sat at the table as he poured her a bowl of soup from a pot on the stove. The steam curled up, carrying the smell of vegetables and herbs. She wrapped her hands around the bowl, feeling the heat seep into her fingers. Each sip felt like it was warming parts of her she thought had frozen forever in the quiet between them. She realized something. This man hadn't just given her water or clothes. He had given her back something she thought she had lost long ago. The right to feel human. And in that moment, she decided she would not go back to the street. No matter what it took, she would not let this be taken away. The transformation was not complete. Not yet. But the first and hardest part had already happened. The dirt was gone, and with it, a part of the old life she never wanted to see again. The soup bowl was empty. She had eaten every drop, as if afraid it would disappear if she slowed down. Her hands stayed wrapped around the warm ceramic, holding on to the last bit of comfort. The human sat across from her, leaning slightly forward. His elbows on the table, his gaze was calm. But there was something searching in it. She felt it like he was waiting for her to say something. "You don't have to tell me," he said quietly, "but I think you want to." The words made her chest tighten. She looked down, staring at the steam that still clung to the bowl. Her voice was soft when it came. "I used to work in a rich house," she said. The words tasted strange, like pulling old stones out. Up her throat, his eyes didn't widen. He didn't interrupt. He simply listened. "They needed hands to clean the halls, to serve food, to take care of guests," she continued. "I was young, smaller than the others, so I could carry trays." Through the crowd without being noticed. A faint memory flickered in her mind. A time when she wore a neat dress, when her hair was tied back and clean. Those days felt unreal now. She took a slow breath before the next words. One day, something valuable went missing. Her fingers curled tightly around the bowl. "They said I took it, even though I didn't." Her voice cracked slightly. "No one believed me, not even the ones I had served for years." The human's brow furrowed slightly. "They didn't try to prove it?" he asked. She shook her head. In their eyes, I was already guilty. Her shoulders tensed as the rest spilled out. "They threw me out without food, without clothes, without a place to go." The image burned in her memory. The gates closing. Behind her, the guards pushing her into the dirt road. She had stood there, shivering, still thinking they might realize the mistake. But they never came. Days turned into weeks, and no one called her back. She had nothing. The smell came later. Not from the first day, not even from the first week. It came when she stopped trying to wash, when she realized the dirt could keep people away. Her gaze flicked up to meet his. "It became my shield," she said. "No one came close enough to hurt me." Her lips trembled, but it also meant no one came close enough to help. The human didn't speak immediately. He studied her face. Not the dirt or scars that remained, but the way her eyes shifted between defiance and pain. There was a truth there, raw and unpolished. It was the truth of someone who had been broken and left to survive alone. "You were just a servant," he said softly, "but they treated you like you were less than nothing." Her jaw tightened. "They needed someone to blame," she said. "And I was easy." A silence settled between them, not heavy like before, but filled with something else. Understanding, she realized he wasn't looking at her with pity. He was looking at her like someone who saw the whole picture. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. Her voice grew quieter. "I thought I would die there," she said, "in the street, surrounded by people, but alone." She swallowed hard, until the human leaned back slightly, his eyes still locked on hers. "I can't change what happened to you," he said, "but I can make sure it doesn't happen again." Her heart skipped at those words. Promises were dangerous. They often came before betrayal, but there was something in his tone, a steady weight, that made her believe. At least, a little. Before she could reply, a faint sound broke the quiet. It came from outside the window, slow, deliberate footsteps on the stone street. Her body froze, her eyes darted to the door, then back to him. Someone was there, moving. Closer, the human stood without a word. Stepping to the window, he glanced outside, his jaw tightening just slightly. When he returned to the table, his voice was calm but firmer than before. "Someone's been watching this place," he said. She felt her stomach twist. She didn't have to ask who it might be. The answer was already in her mind. "It's them," she whispered. The people from her past, the ones who would rather see her dead than see her stand again. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table. "What will you do?" she asked. His eyes met hers, steady and unshaken. "Whatever it takes to keep you safe." There was no hesitation in his tone. It wasn't bravado. It wasn't empty courage. It was simply a statement, as real as the warmth still clinging to her skin from the shower. Something deep in her chest shifted again. Fear was still there, but now it had something standing in front of it, and that something was him. The footsteps outside stopped. Silence pressed against the walls like a held breath. The girl's heart pounded in her chest. Each beat sharp and loud. The human moved to the door, his body angled to shield her. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he listened, the muscles in his jaw tightening. Then came the knock, slow, heavy, deliberate. Not the knock of a neighbor, not the knock of a friend. It was the knock of someone who wanted to be obeyed. The girl's fingers gripped the edge of the table. Her breath quickened. She whispered, "Don't answer." But the human stepped forward and unlatched. The door, when it swung open, two figures stood outside. Both were tall, dressed in the colors of the house she had once served. Their eyes were cold, scanning the room until they landed on her. One of them sneered. "You don't belong here," he said, his voice sharp. "She's coming with us." The girl's body tensed. Every instinct screamed to hide, to disappear. She had spent years running from those eyes, those voices. They had the power to drag her back into the shadows she had just begun to escape. But the human didn't move aside. He stood in the doorway like an unshakable wall. "No," he said. Simply, the man in front laughed. "You think you can keep her?" "She's property of the house. She's not property," the human replied. His voice steady. "She's a person." The second man stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of a weapon at his side. "Move," he said. The human didn't move. Instead, he shifted his stance slightly, enough to block their view of her completely. His eyes locked on theirs. "You're not taking her," he said. "Not now, not ever." A tense silence filled the space between them. The air felt thick, heavy with the threat of violence. The first man's smirk faded. He took a step back. "Then you've made an enemy of the house," he said. The human's reply was calm. "I've faced worse," with one last glare. The two men turned and walked away. Their footsteps echoed against the stone street, fading into the distance. The girl didn't move until the sound was gone completely. When she finally looked at him, her eyes were wide. You stood against them," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He closed the door gently. "They don't decide what happens to you," he said. "You do." The words sank into her like warm light in winter. No one had ever told her she had a choice. No one had ever given her the right to decide her own fate. Her legs felt weak, but not from fear. She stepped toward him, her hands trembling. "I don't know why you're doing this," she said. "I don't have anything to give you." His eyes softened. "You've already given me something," he said. "You've trusted me." The weight of those words settled in her chest. For so long, trust had been a luxury she couldn't afford, and now, somehow, she had given it away without even realizing. Not because he demanded it, but because he had earned it that night. They shared another meal, simple bread and soup, but it felt different from before. The room was no longer just a space with walls. It felt like a barrier against the world outside, a place where she could sit without looking over her shoulder. A place where her smell no longer defined her. Where her past could not reach her without going through him first, after they ate. She sat by the small window. The moonlight spilled across her clean hands. She traced the lines of her skin, still amazed by how different they looked. Every scar was still there, but now they felt like proof. Proof that she had endured. Proof that she had survived long enough to reach this moment. The human came to stand beside her. His shadow fell across the floor. "Long and steady. You're safe here," he said quietly. She turned her head to look at him. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. Then she said the words she had never said to anyone before. "This feels like home." His smile was small, but it carried more weight than any promise. "Then it is," he said. And in that simple answer, she felt something click into place inside her. The fear was still there. Yes, but now it had been pushed into a corner, and in its place was something she had almost forgotten how to feel: belonging. As the night deepened, the house stayed quiet. No knocks, no footsteps, no threats, only the steady rhythm of two people breathing in the same space. The girl curled up on the small couch, wrapped in the same blanket he had given her. Her eyes closed slowly, for the first time in years. Sleep came without fear, and for the first time, the scent around her was not one of filth or survival. It was the warm, faint scent of soap, bread, and safety. It was the smell of home.